who has 10 minutes.
Thank you, Ciarán. And I would like to just start off by paying tribute to Deputy Catherine Murphy and the work that she's done over the last number of months in helping to bring this issue to the fore. This is the first time that I've had the opportunity on the record of the Dáil to congratulate her and pay tribute to her on that work, because there's no doubt that if it wasn't for that work, we wouldn't be here. We wouldn't be here this evening having this debate, and we wouldn't have seen this commission of inquiry being actually launched today by the government. And in the last 10 to 12 days, we've seen some very serious attacks on the use of privilege on members of the Dáil here, and it's very, very important that we now have that has been cleared up. And I would like to just commend RTE and the Irish Times for going to court to get that clarity, to ensure that the court's intention wasn't at any stage to stifle the privilege of Dáil members here. And it's interesting when we see that the biggest media group in the country, Independent News and Media, didn't seem it necessary to go to court to have that, to share and have that right established as well. And the reason for that, as we all know, is because that group is largely owned by the individual who is the subject of the questions, and Dennis O'Brien, and the whole reason that we are here tonight with this tribunal. And it's interesting, I think, today in Leaders' Questions, there was a number of interesting things happened through Leaders' Questions today, but particularly when the Taoiseach was asked why he showed a lack of leadership and didn't defend the right of members of the Dáil to raise questions here in the House during that period when the whole situation was up in the air and we were waiting for the courts to clarify it. And the Taoiseach's only response in relation to that was that if the Dáil had been recalled, it would have been for the CPP to have a meeting in order to decide whether the members should be reprimanded for abusing the privilege, rather than defending a member's right to actually make statements and to represent the public interest here in the House. The reason we're here today is because of the PQ replies and the lack of replies that have been received. And I think today as well, Deputy Tom Fleming in his contribution, and it has been mentioned by other members here tonight in the House when he quoted Justice Hamilton in the Beef Tribunal, where he said if Dáil questions were answered as openly in the Dáil as they were here at the tribunal, we would have had no need for a tribunal at all. And I think that's a very telling statement. And I think, again, it shows and goes back to the tenacity of Deputy Murphy to continue asking the questions, and to have a series of 19 questions that had to be asked, followed up by a Freedom of Information request, to actually get to the stage and discover that there was serious misgivings within the Department of Finance in relation to how the IBRC was being managed and the deals that they were doing, and those concerns weren't being expressed and weren't dealt with in the PQ replies. And it makes me wonder as well, for all of us deputies here put in questions to departments, and we have to wonder, do we get those answers? Maybe, I think naively, when I came into the House in 2011, I thought Dáil questions were a good way of getting information from departments and finding out what was actually happening within government and within government decisions. But you'd have to question the whole purpose, and have to question the answers that we've all received over the last number of years. And some of us maybe didn't have the tenacity and to keep going and keep looking at the answers and keep seeing that it was raising other questions. And there may be a huge number of other issues that this House has been misled on, and that we have simply overlooked or haven't seen the significance of the responses that we've been receiving in relation to questions. And that leads us this evening then to a personal statement by the Minister, where the Minister made a series of corrections to contributions he made in the chamber here on behalf of his department. And I have to wonder why that was a personal statement, because the Minister, as I understand it, when he talks in here, represents the department and represents the corporate body of the department, and not his own personal interests when he's talking here. And I would have thought that personal statements would relate only to the personal matters relating to an individual, and why that actual corrections in relation to the department couldn't be done in such a way where they could be teased out further and questions could be asked as to why it was that the misleading answers were given over a number of months. And we discover then that the department actually did have the information and did have the minutes and did have, through the Minister's corrections, the department did have all the information to hand, but they chose not to answer the questions. And that is a very serious aspect of this whole debacle. And that's something that I think that the Commission of Inquiry has to look into very seriously and look and see what role the department played in misleading this House, what role the department played in facilitating what was going on within IBRC, by their acts of omission and by their acts of not actually taking an active role. And while they might have had concerns, what were they actually doing about those concerns at the time when these issues were arising? And I think that's something that does need to be investigated and needs to be dealt with very, very seriously. There's no doubt that IBRC has worked with very favourable dealings with certain individuals, and it does point to what is obvious to everybody and everybody out there in the public, that it depends who you are in this country as to how you're dealt with. And that goes through all aspects of government business, goes through all aspects of public life, and it's a very telling and sad reflection on the state of our country and of our nation and of our public bodies and our public relationships, when that is a situation where an individual who has huge personal wealth and is seen to have personal power and has close links to the major party in government can get preferential treatment and can get favourable treatment. And when an individual, and a very wealthy individual, can have a verbal conversation with the CEO of a bank and have loan arrangements decided over the basis of that conversation, and all he simply needs to do then is remind the receiver of the bank that they had this conversation, even though, as I understand it, the former CEO has actually disputed that was fully the situation. And I think this Commission of Inquiry has to look at all the transactions and has to see what other individuals, and it has to be laid bare for us here in the public, what other individuals, what other companies benefited from the largesse of the taxpayer and having their debts written off, having favourable agreements put in place for them, having favourable interest rates put in place for them. And particularly when it has been shown that the individuals and citizens who are struggling cannot even get favourable terms, cannot even get the bank to discuss it with them, can't get them to talk to them, and they are left high and dry at all the time. And I think that what we have to see exposed through this commission as well is the whole web of conflicts of interests that permeate every aspect of business that takes place within this state. Where we see, and through the SiteServe sale, we know that the businesses, companies, legal advisors, accountant companies operated on both sides of arrangements and both sides of agreements, advising both parties to the sale, advising both parties legally in relation to that sale as well. And that is an absolute and total conflict of interest. And even if it's a perceived conflict of interest, those companies should have had the moral wherewithal to actually excuse themselves from that process and at least present a process where another outside company, a competing company, would come in and give advice. I mean, how many times have we told people, and would we advise people? I know I would never advise people doing the transaction to allow a solicitor to act for both parties in relation to it, but yet this is what happens at the level of top business in this country, and this is what happens right across the board. And we hear all this talk of Chinese walls being developed. Well, the amount of Chinese walls, they'd have to be as big as the Great Wall of China to protect the interests of the state in relation to what has gone on within these businesses. And I do believe, and I think that the actual commission should look at what has happened after the liquidation of IBRC as well, because there has been massive decisions taken there. And I think one of those decisions would be the sale of the mortgages from the former IBRC, where 12,700 mortgages were sold off to venture capital funds and vulture capitalists, as they're commonly called. Mortgages with a face value of 1.8 billion euros. But we don't know what the loss has been to the taxpayer because the department won't reveal it and the receiver won't reveal it, and we don't know what they were actually sold for. And I think what it would do, it would show how the different people are treated in this society, because I know from dealings with individual mortgage holders that some of them would have been in a position to buy their mortgage off the IBRC if they were allowed to do that. But when they asked to do that, they were shot down by the receiver and their mortgages were packaged up and and sold off to vulture funds, who are now calling in the full face value of the amount that is owed on those mortgages. And those people weren't treated to be able to get favourable agreements or favourable treatment from the IBRC. Why not? Because they weren't wealthy enough, they weren't connected enough, and they weren't rich enough. Thank you.